I love Mr. Robot. It's one of the most underrated shows I've ever seen, aside from some of Mike Flanagan's work, but that's a video for another time. This video is meant to serve a few purposes. Since the show is going to be 10 years old coming of this year, I figured I might as well make a video on one of my favorite pieces of media of all time. And since my goal was to analyze one scene from the show, what better scene to analyze than the first scene? To not only talk about how incredible of a job this show does to get the audience invested in just a mere 6 minutes, but to hopefully get more people watching this beautiful piece of art. This video will be divided up into two sections. The first section is one that is mostly spoiler-free, albeit with some very minor spoilers for episode 1, while the second section will be talking about some pretty significant spoilers that detail the first scene in a new light. But don't worry, I'll warn you when we get to it. So without further wait, let's get on to... The scene begins in pitch black, with the show's protagonist, Elliot Alderson, speaking specifically to us, calling the audience friend, all while acknowledging how strange this all is.
Maybe I should give you a name. But that's a slippery slope. You're only in my head. We have to remember that.
If the cadence of his voice wasn't a dead giveaway for what kind of person Elliot is, then this line of dialogue implies pretty quickly that Elliot is an extremely paranoid and possibly mentally ill individual. You'll quickly learn that Elliot's way of speaking is stilted and awkward, and we find the reason as to why shortly. Elliot continues to say that there is a powerful group of people who are secretly running the world. The top
1% of the top 1%, the guys that play God without permission.
Which is when we are introduced to the first shot in the entire series. Usually at the beginning of a show or movie, that first establishing shot is everything. That first shot tells you what its story, character, and themes are all about. In Mr. Robot, our first shot isn't of Elliot or an object that is personal to Elliot. Our first shot is of a bunch of men in suits, probably casually discussing ways of how they'll change the world without any regard for the people below them. Their faces are covered because they could be anyone. They all have such an immense amount of power that even the background shows them next to skyscrapers with no sign of ground. They are on top of the world and looking down on everyone. This is what Mr. Robot is about. This is what Mr. Robot's idea is. Society. A person who hates society and everything it stands for. A person who wishes he could remove the invisible hand from manipulating everyone. Which is why the next scene is just as important, as it illustrates Elliot not being on the same level. He's on the ground floor. Elliot dreams of saving the world, but he can't. He's not that special. He's just anonymous and alone. However, Elliot worries that he's being followed by some men he was talking about. To which we cut to our first shot of Elliot, slightly out of frame in the lower right corner, with only his face from nose up visible. This shot is meant to hone in on Elliot's persona, his eyes being the main focus and what they're looking at, but it also makes him look a bit more mysterious. He's not completely visible to the audience, so we not only wonder what he looks like, but who he is staring at. The scene then cuts over to see two men in black looking over at Elliot, suggesting that despite his paranoia, there may be some credibility to what he is saying. However, it is later revealed in the same episode that these men in black that Elliot keeps seeing are not in fact real. This is one of the many times that Elliot himself will convey misinformation to the viewer. Throughout the episode, we consistently see these men in black, and it plays with our heads that one of them will actually be real. It's tension that gets carried out throughout the episode, but it's never properly released until the very end, when he is celebrating his first steps of taking down E-Corp. Because this is such a narrative high point for Elliot, the show decides to pay off the men in black by having one of them force Elliot into his car to meet a mysterious person higher up. While I won't go any further in discussing what happens next, it's pretty safe to say that Elliot is an extremely unreliable narrator. We then return to Elliot, his head still in the bottom right corner, but his face is now completely visible. This kind of framing technique is called lower quadrant framing, and is a framing device that is constantly used throughout not only Mr. Robot, but a lot of Sam Esmail's work. When shots are framed, most audiences are used to the conventional use of the rule of thirds. If you don't know what the rule of thirds is, simply put, it's a filmmaking technique where the frame is divided into 9 sections, followed by a series of evenly spaced horizontal and vertical lines. This basically makes the screen look like one big game of tic-tac-toe, which helps give the frame a more balanced composition. Mr. Robot uses this technique, but not in the traditional manner. The shots are still divided into thirds, but instead of the characters being in the central parts of the vertical lines, they are mostly put on the inside of the lower third of the screen. Since we, as viewers, are more drawn to the top of the screen, the last thing we usually look at is the bottom right. The only time Mr. Robot uses a conventional framing method consistently was in the pilot when we are getting introduced to Elliot in his conversation with Rohit, but we'll talk more about that later. The show uses short-sighting to reinforce the feeling of isolation and oppression for the characters, and the weight of society that's bearing down on them. It gives the feeling that the character is the smallest thing in the room, as if they are boxed in. Not only does it invoke the feeling of our characters being isolated and oppressed, but it also highlights its importance in a scene. This type of filmmaking partly defines what Mr. Robot is as a show. Without it, part of the show's identity would be missing. This type of cinematography forces you to put yourself in the character's headspace and to empathize with these characters. The show uses uncomfortable framing as a way to oddly give the viewer comfort in the terrifying world of Mr. Robot that closely resembles our own. As we come back to Elliot, he continues to say,
This is about last night. I should have gone to Angela's birthday party. Instead, I went to...
This scene continues the discussion of Elliot being an unreliable narrator from earlier. The way it transitions from the subway to the cafe is very jarring, and that's the point. The show wants you to know early on that from this point forward, Elliot isn't reliable enough to form a coherent timeline, whether that's due to mental illness, or that he's purposely leaving out details to try and secure the audience's support, is unknown at this point in the story. All we know is that Elliot cannot be trusted. As we transition to the cafe, we can see that Elliot is acting quite nervous and awkward as he waits for Rohit, our antagonist of the scene. This suggests that Elliot rarely, if ever, confronts people in person, perhaps suggesting that this may be his first time doing it. This suspicion is confirmed by Elliot himself a few minutes later, when he states that he usually does this from the comfort of his computer, but wanted to do it in person to work on his social skills. However, there may be a deeper reason as to why Elliot confronts Rohit in person, but that's a discussion for later on in the video. Notably, this is also the first time we're able to get a good look at Elliot. Before on the train, most of his body was cut off, so we couldn't see what he was wearing, but in the cafe, we get a better picture. In film or television, clothing can play a big part in telling you about the character, whether it's to distinguish two different environments the character is in, to give you an idea of who the character is, subtly displaying the elements or themes of your story, or to convey an arc your character is going through. A perfect example of this would be Edgar Wright's hit 2017 crime thriller, Baby Driver. In the film, our protagonist Baby is stuck in a life he wants to escape from desperately. Throughout the film, he wears lots of whites and blacks, white representing the purity and good of Baby outside the criminal underworld, whilst black is meant to express his criminal lifestyle. Most of the time, it'll combine the two, showing that while Baby is in the criminal underworld, he still has a good and pure heart. It's not until the end of the film that Baby is wearing purely white to signify how he is free from the criminal underworld and is ready to start living an honest life with his love interest Deborah. It's such a simplistic use of color coding and costume design that it may not seem important upon first glance, but when we analyze it more deeply, you'll see that there's an entirely new meaning to be found with just the clothes the characters are wearing. So now that you know that clothing can tell you a lot about the character, its story, or the themes it's trying to present, how does this apply to Mr. Robot? Well, looking at Elliot, he wears all black. In fact, he wears the same outfit for a majority of the show, almost like some kind of superhero, which is definitely the intention from the creator of the show. And since Elliot has a personal disdain for modern society, it makes sense why none of his clothing is branded, as that would be buying into an almost consumerist mindset that Elliot despises greatly. It's like a protest against corporations and being reduced to just another company's brand, which only gets further reinforced when we see that Elliot's outfit at work is him attempting to wear the same black hoodie and jeans, only for his boss Gideon to comment on how it's not appropriate work attire, to which we cut to Elliot taking off his hoodie, revealing his work uniform underneath. Throughout Mr. Robot, it becomes increasingly apparent that hoodies and masks are ways of how Elliot conceals the truth from the audience, himself, and everyone else around him. At the same time, it's a way where Elliot can blend into the background without being noticed, reflecting his social anxiety and desire to be anonymous. That much is obvious when we see Elliot slowly walk towards Rohit as he blends among everyone else he passes in the background of the cafe. Compare that to our antagonist Rohit. He dresses rather normally, but in a way where people can see him and know who he is. He struts around the cafe confidently and even nods at his employees, who give him his regular order. In this scene, it is purposely shown that Rohit feels like he is on top of the world, and that everything is going his way, which will only make his downfall all the more satisfying later on. Elliot sits in front of Rohit and takes off his hoodie. He is both literally and symbolically unmasking himself, due to the fact that he is the one in control in this situation, and doesn't feel like he needs to hide anything from Rohit. Elliot proceeds to ask Rohit if he's Ron, which is another name that Rohit goes by. As Elliot says this, Rohit immediately moves his arm to try and get more comfortable. Elliot proceeds to talk further. He says that his real name is Rohit Mehta, and that he changed it when he bought his first Ron's coffee shop 6 years ago with 17 more on the way. From just Elliot saying these few lines, we can already get an understanding of how Elliot operates. Sure, he has severe social anxiety, but in the first 10 seconds, Elliot has made sure that Rohit has nothing to hide behind by symbolically unmasking him and making him feel vulnerable. Similar to how Elliot literally unmasked himself previously because he has nothing to hide. Rohit notices this, but he tries playing it cool. He uses hand gestures and makes his body appear relaxed, when his cadence contradicts that. He tries speaking calmly, but his voice cracks a bit. He knows exactly what he has done wrong, but he doesn't know whether Elliot knows this or not, so he tries playing it cool. He's letting Elliot speak here to avoid incriminating himself any further. It's quite smart actually, and as you'll see throughout the conversation between Rohit and Elliot, Rohit is quite cunning in the ways he tries to desperately manipulate Elliot. Elliot continues, saying that he likes coming to Ron's Coffee, as it is one of the few places that offers a fiber connection with gigabit speed. That it's so good, it scratched that part of his mind that doesn't allow good to exist without condition. This line of dialogue tells us two very important bits of information about Elliot that will be the central focus throughout the show. The first is that he seems to have a liking for technology in general, something that will be confirmed further throughout his conversation with Rohit. And two, Elliot has quite a depressing mindset when referring to that line about how Rohit's internet speed scratched that part of his brain, which is when Elliot began to hack Rohit. Immediately when Elliot says this, the music comes in. The soundtrack in the show is composed by one man named Mac Quayle. He's composed music for mostly short films and a couple of well-known franchises like American Horror Story and The Last of Us. But his best work by far lies in Mr. Robot. When composing the score for Mr. Robot, he would go back and forth between major and minor chords that would help describe Elliot as a character and the conflict he goes through. Major chords are often used for melodies that have bright and happy sounds to them, whereas minor chords are usually used for sad and depressing melodies. Mac Quayle does something that he himself describes to be quite unusual with the two, which is that he frequently switches back and forth between the major and minor chords. However, in Mr. Robot, it works because of how unusual our protagonist is. It works well for Elliot's character because at the beginning of the conversation, he's quite nervous, so the music begins quite small, outlining Elliot's character where you can hear small wisps of the major and minor chords switching back and forth. Throughout the conversation, as Elliot progressively unloads more information that's exposing Rohit, the music gets faster, emphasizing the tension of the scene. It's not until later when Elliot talks about himself and his father, the music gets softer, only for it to go back to being serious and focused once the subject changes back to what Rohit has done. The music then becomes more confident when Elliot tells Rohit that he's turning him into the police at the end of the scene. That's why the music in Mr. Robot is so brilliant. It's there to push the narrative forward and to give a sense of progression with Elliot's character. It's another method that Mr. Robot will use at times to help the audience properly understand Elliot as a person and what he's going through. Sometimes it'll be used quite subtly, like in this scene, or sometimes it'll be loud and bombastic to accentuate how stressed, overwhelmed, or disoriented Elliot is.
What did you say your name was?
I'm Ollie. Times like these, I really wish I had a mute button for life. Isn't that better?
It's one of the many details that are a testament to this show's genius. When Rohit hears what Elliot told him, he can't help but panic. It's almost like watching a deer in the headlights. He has just been told something that could ruin his life, and he doesn't know how to even react at first. He tries acting confused, but Elliot immediately shuts down any further bullshit from Rohit, and gets straight to the point, telling him about a secret website he's running. We as the audience don't know what's on this website, but we know it's something bad by seeing Rohit's reaction after Elliot tells him this. As Rohit acts confused and angry, he tries to subtly put his hand over his iPad to further block Elliot's view from seeing anything. In his eyes, this looks less suspicious than turning off the iPad, since turning it off would indicate that he's guilty and has something to hide. Elliot explains further about how he found the website, and that he is now in full control of his operation. I'm simplifying what he's saying, of course, because what Elliot is saying is a lot more technical, which is something I appreciate about this show. The show doesn't try to dumb things down for the audience, instead it shows us just how smart Elliot is. The best part of it is that it's not random techno-babble you'd see on your average run-of-the-mill TV show. What Elliot is saying is very realistic and could be applied in real life. In fact, every single hack or feat Mr. Robot pulls off can be replicated if the person knows what they're doing. While the show's representation of hacking and cybersecurity isn't flawless, as someone who is currently studying cybersecurity, this is by far the most realistic depiction of hacking I've ever seen. It's quite apparent to me that everyone involved has done their homework. One of my favorite instances of Mr. Robot incorporating tech and cybersecurity into its story has to be Elliot's first line in the show.
Hello, friend.
Which is a reference to an email worm virus from 2006 that would send emails to every one of your contacts with the subject of the email using the phrase, "Hello friend," which is such a weird and obscure reference to put in your show, but that makes me appreciate the callback even more. Elliot then mentions how Rohit made the site really hard for anyone to see, but he saw it. This line proves that Elliot isn't just anybody, he's someone who is not to be trifled with. After Elliot mentions that he is in control of the site, Rohit immediately tries to assume control of the situation by asking Elliot to leave, but before Rohit can say another word, Elliot interrupts him by telling him what he found on the website. Rohit again tries to desperately gain control back from Elliot in any way he can, to the point where he even threatens to call the police on Elliot. Still, Elliot shuts that threat down immediately by telling Rohit that if he calls the police, they will find out what's on the site. Throughout the entire conversation, we've been practically kept in the dark about what Rohit had actually done, slowly building the tension of what Rohit could be hiding until they finally reveal it to us here. Rohit distributes pictures of young people, 100 terabytes worth to be exact. Just to clarify how insanely big that number is, you could fit 500 hours of footage on only 1 terabyte. By looking at how Rohit acts throughout his conversation with Elliot, his need to be in control and his narcissistic qualities make complete sense after learning how much of a scumbag he is. You can clearly hear Elliot's frustration and anger come out when he says,
Personally, man, I was hoping it was just gonna be some BDSM stuff. You realize how much simpler that would have been?
Elliot awaits a response from a despondent Rohit, who is clearly trying to find a way to get out of the situation. He's already tried asserting his illusion of control over Elliot, but now he'll try a different approach where he plays the victim in hopes of garnering sympathy from Elliot.
I did not hurt anyone. I never did. That's my personal life.
This type of logic is completely fucked, and fairly typical of child predators, where they'll claim that they didn't hurt anyone. In Rohit's case, while he didn't do anything physically to the children, he still played a part in hurting them by perpetuating the market, by supplying people with that kind of content. He then adds that this sort of thing is his personal life, which only adds to how pathetic he is. He can no longer hide his shame, that this is the only thing he has outside of his business, and he treats it as if it's some kind of hobby, all while shedding his crocodile tears. Elliot leans in close to Rohit. As the music dies down and becomes softer, he tells him that he's very different too. At first, it seems like Elliot is attempting to sympathize and relate to Rohit, but that gets shot down when Elliot insults him in the very next sentence. It's here we get to learn a bit more about Elliot's personal life. he has severe social anxiety, and that his deceased father was the only person he could talk to. When Rohit hears this, you can almost see a light switch flick in his head, that this may be a way to manipulate Elliot. Rohit is so desperate to cling on to anything that will spare him from getting what he deserves. So the second Elliot mentions that his dead father was the only person he could properly connect to, he tries to take advantage of the situation. He calms down, and to seem sympathetic to Elliot, he asks him how his father died. This once again gives us more insight into Elliot's motives and reasoning for why he does what he does. Elliot explains that his father died from leukemia caused by radiation at the company he worked at. Elliot tried exposing the company as an unsafe work environment, but ultimately could never prove anything. This suggests that this is one of the main reasons for why he hates society and corporations. While we find out later in the show that the reason is a lot more complex than that, this line does serve as a decent baseline for us to theorize about why he is the way he is. Rohit immediately tries to cry after hearing Elliot's story, in an attempt to once again hopefully gain some sympathy from Elliot, and as a silent way to beg for mercy. None of this works on Elliot, of course, and in fact it shows that Elliot kind of expected that, and coldly tells Rohit that
You don't have to worry anymore.
Rohit has tried getting him to leave and emotionally manipulating him, but it doesn't work, so he assumes that he might be getting blackmailed. He musters up what little confidence he has for one final attempt to show Elliot that he is the one in control in this situation. Elliot clearly doesn't care though. He's not doing any of this for money, he's doing it because there's something wrong with the world, and he wants to fix it. Rohit clearly sees Elliot's still disinterested look on his face, and decides to slip in the mention of how he too broke the law. Elliot admits that he's partially right. He is breaking the law, but it's for more noble reasons compared to what Rohit has been up to. He admits to Rohit that the reason he wanted to come here was to work on his social anxiety, and that his main concern was Rohit fleeing when he confronted him, so he put a date and time on his anonymous tip. When Elliot mentions this, Rohit goes into a full panic. Before he was attempting to hide how scared and weak he was, but we now see that come into full effect. He tells Elliot that he will pay him whatever amount he wants, contradicting what he said earlier, when he said that he refuses to pay Elliot, since if this was blackmail, he'd ask for a bigger amount next time. The scene comes to a close with Elliot responding to Rohit's pleas by saying,
That's the part you were wrong about, Rohit. I don't give a shit about money.
with the title card appearing, setting the tone for what the rest of the show will be about, while also leaving some intrigue for the viewer to watch more. This is how you open a show. We start off in a coffee shop. We don't know why Elliot is there or what he's going to be doing, but throughout the course of this scene, we are slowly given bits of information that help us piece together what is going on. The conversation between Elliot and Rohit is intriguing. It starts off with neither us or Rohit knowing what is going on, which is why when Elliot sits down, it is framed from Rohit's perspective. As the conversation progresses, everything starts to intensify by tiny increments, until that tension is finally released, when Elliot reveals that he had already called the police and leaves the building. So much happens in the span of only 6 minutes. We get introduced to the character, his motivation, his past, what he's capable of, his weaknesses, the antagonist, and a small idea of what the show will be about. All of it is done without spoon-feeding the audience with information. Instead of Elliot directly telling the audience about himself, we only get told about the threat, that people are after Elliot, and it's because of something he did. We don't get told anything further until the scene where he confronts Rohit. And the way Elliot conveys information to Ron feels very natural and fluid. It shows a lot of restraint for the first minute of your show to talk about the 1% coming after you, only for the explanation as to why that's the case to take place in a boring coffee shop. There aren't any explosions or major action set pieces, just a conversation between two people in a coffee shop, and I think that's brilliant. Before we end the video though, there is something I'd like to talk about. However, for this section of the video, I'll be covering some major spoilers, so if you haven't seen Mr. Robot yet, do yourself a favor, watch it, and then come back to this video when you're done. Okay, spoiler talk in 3, 2, 1. The final thing I want to talk about in this video is the rewatchability of this show, and how this scene gets completely recontextualized on a rewatch. To give a bit of context, near the end of Season 1, it is revealed that the person that Elliot met who has been helping him with his mission of changing the world is not in fact real, but another personality of his that has taken the appearance of his father. Later in the show, it is established that Elliot may have another personality that is revealed to be the mastermind. It is then told that throughout the entire show, the person that we had been following that we thought was Elliot was not in fact Elliot, but the mastermind. The mastermind is a personality that was designed to protect the real Elliot from all his trauma and pain. One of them was Elliot being sexually abused by his father when he was a child. This completely recontextualizes everything we've been told thus far throughout the show, and acts as the lowest point of Elliot's arc in the story. The question you may be asking now though is, how does any of this relate to the first scene in the show? Well, the creator Sam Esmail stated that he already had the entire story for Mr. Robot planned out before production even began on the show, because he was planning on turning it into a movie until he realized that a movie would be too short for the story he had planned. So with all of the plot twists and narrative beats already planned out, we get a lot of foreshadowing throughout the entire show, including the first episode. In the first scene, we see that the person Elliot targets is a child predator. On a first viewing, most viewers may not pay too much attention to Elliot's first target, but on rewatch, we are aware that this person was not targeted at random, but because on a subconscious level, Elliot, or the mastermind, wanted to seek out karma for the abuse Elliot suffered when he was a kid, without yet even knowing why he was doing it. All he knows is that he is angry and fed up with the modern society around him that has become complacent. This leads us to the next topic and our guest for the video, Skyespixru, who is here to discuss how one of the show's biggest themes intersects into its opening scene. Hello, Skye.
Hello, friend. One of the most important themes you can notice in Mr. Robot is the idea of control. Elliot starts the show by telling us about how the top 1% of the top 1% play God without permission, how they control everything and everyone. Then, when talking to Rahit, Elliot says,
Whoever's in control of the exit nodes is also in control of the traffic, which makes me the one in control.
It makes you wonder why the idea of control is so important in this show. It's connected to a few elements. For one, it talks about the very leftist idea that the masses, the workers, the people living their day-to-day lives, all live in favor of the invisible hand of capitalism, all working towards the same goal of making more money for the elite, even unknowingly. One big thing the show talks about is giving the masses back the control of their lives, of getting rid of their debt, of redistributing wealth, so they can live their lives for themselves instead of for the elite that exploit them, with Elliot guiding them towards that goal with fsociety. Which brings us to the second reason why control is so important in this show, Elliot's lack of control. Elliot is someone trying to help the oppressed by giving them back their agency and control because, yes, he's an anarchist, but also because he is someone who's scarred by the way control was taken away from him. From the way his mom treated him to the way his dad was killed by something completely out of control, but most importantly, by the way his father molested him when he was a child and completely took away his agency. Which brings us back to the scene with Rohit. Elliot is taking away control from Rohit, from the guy who distributes child pornography, by showing him what it feels like to have no control, how hopeless it feels, because that is how he felt, even if Elliot doesn't remember that at this point in the show. He is, little by little, fighting to take back control of his life because of the way control was taken from him. The first scene of episode 1 already introduces the idea of control and the power play that comes from being controlled and being the one in control. It forces you to keep in mind what being powerless is and how freeing it can be to be the one in control. So for the rest of the show, it always makes you think about who has control in each scene, in each season, and who is powerless. A struggle that Elliot has within his own mind with his different personalities, and that the mastermind at the end of the show finally resolves, fully giving Elliot back control of his own life.
This moment exemplifies how Mr. Robot carefully constructs its narrative, planting subtle clues that gain new significance as the story unfolds, all while still making the scene interesting on a surface level. This opening does more than just introduce us to Elliot as a character. It perfectly sets the stage for the rest of the series, immersing us in its brutal world that is terrifyingly similar to ours. The show's storytelling, themes, cinematography, music, acting, and unsettling atmosphere are what makes Mr. Robot's opening scene one of the best. thank you so much for watching, and a very special thanks to Skyespixru for collaborating with me on this video. She's working on a Mr. Robot video herself, so if you like this video then you'll definitely like hers. Her channel can be found down in the description if you're interested. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'm aware it's a tad different to what I usually cover, but I love Mr. Robot so much that I thought I may as well do a video on it. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all for the next one. Take care, y'all. Bye.